I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Ruebusch, and with me is Patrick Wyman, my stalwart co-host. Today we've got all kinds of fights to discuss. We're actually mixing two cards on today's episode, lending the greater portion of our time to UFC 205. Of course, one episode would never be enough for this fantastic lineup, and so we'll be covering two UFC 205 fights on today's episode, and then we will be doing two scheduled fights for this coming weekend's card, which is the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 3 finale. Will the UFC ever come up with a way of naming events that is not so goddamn unwieldy, Pat? Do you know what is...
Absolutely not.
You know what's the bane of my existence? Writing titles for pieces. Because I try to include the name of the event in the title if I can, so it won't just be preview so-and-so and so. It'll be UFC The Ultimate Fighter Latin America 3 preview. That takes up so many characters, I have no room left for what I actually want to say.
I just go with UFC Fight Night number whatever, Dos Anjos versus Ferguson, or I don't even bother with, unless it is clearly and obviously labeled a tough finale. I don't even do that. It's just like this stuff. It is maddening. It is absolutely maddening. I'm going to get mad if we start talking about the UFC's naming conventions.
Okay, let's just, I guess the names don't really matter either, but although it's a search word, it's a keyword. But let me tell everyone listening what we are discussing first, and then we will jump in. So the fights we have scheduled for today's conversation are, of course, Joanna Jedrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz for the UFC Women's Strawweight title. We're going to kick off with that one. And then a lightweight contenders matchup, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Michael Johnson. Both of those very exciting fights. And then later on in the show, we're going to be talking about some of the fights from the Tough Lamb 3 finale. Alexa Grasso versus Heather Jo Clark. And, of course, Rafael dos Anjos versus Tony Ferguson. A lot of really meaningful lightweight fights this weekend. And I didn't even mention, like, Dariush Magomedov. There are some fights that happening this weekend that matter. And Marcin Held comes into the UFC on the same card as well. Good stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this card. It's going to be a really, really fun event, I think, top to bottom. Though I would say you could probably skip most of the Fox Sports 1 prelims, even though they should be kind of fun and violent. Like, you're not going to miss much name value-wise on there. Mm-hmm. But the entire main card, I think, is going to be a good time. Even the finale fight for Tough Latin America 3.
Yeah, I like those guys.
Look pretty talented.
I agree. I like those guys. It was one of the more promising matchups I've seen in some time. As a guy who doesn't watch Tough and then just like watches old episodes, the fight portions only, to research for it. Yeah, they looked all right. So it should be fun.
Yeah, I'm into this. I'm very into this.
Well, before we talk about that card, because the only thing bad you could say about it is that it truly pales in comparison to UFC 205. And so let's kick it off with 205. Joanna Jedrzejczyk, the champion, defending her belt against Karolina Kowalkiewicz. What are the odds that there would be two top contenders from the same country when that country is otherwise so underrepresented in the UFC? It happened. We have Poland versus Poland, defending champion versus upstart. And I love this fight. I really, really love this fight. Karolina Kowalkiewicz, ever since I first saw her, I think I first saw her when she fought Mizuki Inoue back in 2014. And ever since I saw that fight in Invicta, she really impressed me. I have been waiting for her to evolve in certain ways and then watched her evolve in other ways that I didn't expect. She still has her limitations, many of which were around at that time. But she really, really impressed me with that win over Rose Namajunas, because in the end, it wasn't even really that close of a win. She definitely took that fight, and I did not expect that, because people who listen to this show will obviously know how highly we regard Rose Namajunas as a fighter, especially as a developing prospect. Kowalkiewicz came in with none of the things that we love in Namajunas, really, and just found a way to beat her. And I think that's her strong suit. And then, of course, need I say how much fondness I have for the fighting skills and personality of Joanna Jedrzejczyk. There is nothing not to like about either of these two women.
Yeah, I mean, Kowalkiewicz is a gamer, man. I mean, she's durable, she's tough. Like she's the kind of the definition of the fighter who goes out and is smart about how she approaches things. She finds ways to win fights that she shouldn't win. There's she has been, I would say, at a kind of a physical athletic disadvantage in 2 of her 3 UFC fights, maybe even all 3 of her UFC fights. But she has her plan. She knows what she's going to go out there and she's going to try and do. And she never fails to execute it. Like she doesn't seem to be overwhelmed by the moment. She doesn't seem to be overwhelmed by the opponent. She's fine with losing a couple of minutes of a fight. That doesn't really seem to affect her mentally. And that's not really a teachable thing, you know, like you can't teach that kind of mental and physical toughness.
Yeah, absolutely. She is, I've said this a few times, but there is a quality I've always associated with a certain fighter. I don't know. I just said associated like I was from Baltimore. There's a quality I've always associated with a certain fighter. It is Marcos Maidana, and I have always seen him as a guy who everything may not be pretty, but he's smarter than you think he is, given his style. And most specifically, when he sees that something is working, he's going to do that thing. He has a very good eye for what is effective, and he will press any advantage. The moment he finds it, he will grab onto it like a pit bull and keep pressing it. And that is Kowalkiewicz. I think there's no better example than the Namajunas fight, in which Kowalkiewicz had a bit of trouble with Namajunas' outboxing and everything. She found out that Namajunas was not that great in the clinch, and she went for the clinch over and over and over for the rest of that fight. The rest of that fight was won with elbows and knees and short punches. And she found that Ronda Marcos was vulnerable to leg kicks, and so she just went hard after the leg kicks, and that set up the rest of her game. Anything that Karolina Kowalkiewicz finds in her arsenal that is effective, she will press the hell out of that advantage. And it sounds really obvious, but not a lot of fighters do it. A lot of fighters can be discouraged, and it seems really difficult to kind of crack her poise in pushing that game plan. Like you said, Pat, she doesn't mind if you take a round away from her or a few minutes away from her. She's just going to keep pressing and find a way to make her game plan work. She's an expert round winner. I think that's the big thing I'm saying.
Well, yeah, she knows how to win rounds. I mean, you look at her record, and it's all decisions, right? I don't think she's ever finished a fight. So everything that she does is predicated on scoring, going out there, peppering her opponent with volume, and winning rounds and doing whatever it takes to win rounds, whether that's takedowns or whether that's the clinch or whether that's kind of what I think we consider to be her wheelhouse, which is in and out striking. She's got a very circular approach, darts in, lands a couple of shots, gets out on another angle, and she just does that over and over and over again, working at a pace that her opponent can't really match. She looks to me like she's become a better athlete since she came into the UFC. I think she's probably on a better strength and conditioning program. She's faster. I was struck watching her pre-UFC fights at how unathletic she seemed. But since she's come into the UFC, she looks substantially quicker to me. Like she's coming into her physical prime. Like she's paying more attention to her nutrition and strength and conditioning and what have you. And there's a real difference there. Like I would say she's a slightly above average athlete for the division now, and combined with her mental gifts and like incredible cardio, works at an unbelievable pace. And I think is a 5-round fighter waiting to happen. Yeah,
absolutely. She does have a couple finishes on her record, but pre-UFC way early. She's got 2 submissions and a TKO in her debut.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's been nothing but decisions for the last 2 years, the last 5 fights. So, and it is majority decisions. Not majority decisions, but a majority of decisions. Absolutely. I think let's talk about we've tiptoed around it a bit. Then let's talk about what is wrong with Kowalkiewicz. Why we say she doesn't seem very athletic. What's wrong with her technique? I mentioned before having some issues. What would you say are either the symptoms of unathleticism, things that suggest to you that she's not very athletic, or what are the things that her unathleticism causes her to do?
Well, so she was first of all, she was kind of slow. Like she was not quick of foot. Like she did a lot of movement, but it wasn't especially fast movement.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that she had pretty good footwork kind of made her look faster than she actually was too. So that was the first thing. That was the first thing. That was the first symptom. But more than that, it was that her lower body and her upper body seems to be doing entirely different things when she threw punches. Like it was a kind of a basic series of technical flaws, and I think we actually talked in depth about Karolina Kowalkiewicz's like technical flaws in her punching mechanics. Now she seems to have fixed that a little bit. Like she seems to be more coordinated almost.
Yeah, it's not wholly repaired. Not to the extent that Joanna Jedrzejczyk's striking is fluid and well attached each piece to the other, but it is better than it was. There is still there's a kind of awkwardness where there are, at times, even when the whole body seems to be what it's doing, there are arm punches and then it's still dissociated from each other. You know what I mean? Like I'm stepping and turning my foot, but somewhere in the middle of my torso, it's not actually connecting to my arms. My feet are in the right position, but I'm still arm punching. I'm still just kind of throwing my arm out there. And I don't know what the reason for that is specifically, but it's like, it's Holly Holm mechanics. I think like probably the best case scenario for a fighter like Kowalkiewicz who has that problem is to punch like Holly Holm. Like have a good form that you've fallen into. You're not necessarily going to be a power puncher ever, but the athleticism too, the ability to throw quick strikes, I think has made her more dangerous in places like the clinch. Her punches are still fairly easy to see coming. She throws in volume, which helps cover that up. But really in the clinch is when she can get quick, short arcs on things like knees and elbows. She wasn't hitting Rose Namajunas lightly in the clinch, nor was she when she clinched with Heather Jo Clark or Ronda Marcos. She seems to...
The kind of the great paradox of it is that as not as kind of pillow-fisted as she looks throwing strikes at range, she's a mauler in the clinch. Like she throws elbows with real pop. She gets real torque into them. And I kind of wonder whether, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because she's more planted in the clinch.
I think so. I think maybe
she's forced to sit down by the fact that she's attached to her opponent.
Because she has some pretty decent ground and pound as well. When she's on top of an opponent, she can land with some pop. I think it's maybe the fact that she's kind of had her ability to sit down on shots trained out of her, or maybe she only feels comfortable throwing shots when she really has her feet planted, and so she would never be able to do that in the striking because you're never going to just be able to stand in one place. You have to be able to move while you strike. I think maybe it's just the fact that she's not comfortable putting power into shots, and she maybe actively prefers just throwing volume of any kind at range and saving the weight transfer for places like the clinch and the ground.
Yeah, well, because she has, it seems to me, like really naturally strong hips, like really, really strong hips. And you see that in her takedown defense. She still hasn't been taken down officially, I don't think, in the UFC. And even going back to her pre-UFC career, she was extremely hard to take down. She's really strong whenever she gets attached to her opponent. And so strong hips, that's going to play itself out in some power if you sit down on your shots.
Absolutely.
So it's not like she doesn't have it. I mean, but it's been interesting to watch her evolution because it kind of, I think, parallels the evolution that we've seen from Joanna Jedrzejczyk in her time in the UFC, where you come in and because you're worried about getting taken down and because you're very focused on the specific things that you know you can win at, like against any opponent, your game over time starts to kind of blossom and move outward from your core competencies into the full breadth of your game. Because Joanna Jedrzejczyk, the first few fights in the UFC was exclusively a boxer, and then she added some clinch work, and then she kind of started letting her kicks go. And the version that we saw of her against Claudia Gadelha was everything. It was everything that Joanna Jedrzejczyk does well. And from Kowalkiewicz, we saw in her first outing a kind of an in and out boxer who was just going to pepper her opponent with volume, and then she started to add the clinch, and then she started to add a couple of takedowns. And I'm curious as to where this is going to lead with her. Like, what does the fully developed, comfortable with everything Karolina Kowalkiewicz look like?
Yeah, I think with Kowalkiewicz, the process is more that she's actually still discovering what she's good at. I think maybe the Kowalkiewicz who fought Mizuki Inoue, had she known she was a good clinch fighter, she would have done that. You know what I mean? She fought at range with Inoue, which is probably Inoue's best range as well. And I think, having only started in 2012 and having come from a Krav Maga background, not exactly like a respected school of training for mixed martial artists.
She had Muay Thai. She had a whole bunch of Muay Thai fights.
Did she?
Yeah, her background's in Muay Thai.
Let me see. I'm going to look this up while we're talking about it. Former KSW champion. Oh, she did train in Muay Thai and decided to make it a career. She fought 2 amateur fights before turning pro. It doesn't exactly say how many fights she had. I'm going to assume, based on her mechanics, she didn't do it as long as Jedrzejczyk did, or necessarily under the same.
She's definitely doesn't have the kind of background that Jedrzejczyk does, but she definitely trained in that beforehand, and I think you see that kind of in her clinch game.
Yeah, she considers herself. Anytime I've heard her talk about it, she considers herself a Krav Maga stylist. Like, that is the style from which she originates.
Huh. Okay. Interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, she says she began her mixed martial arts career at the age of 16 when she began training in Krav Maga. That's what. Oh, and then it says she later trained in Muay Thai and decided to make it a career. She fought 2 major amateur fights before turning pro. That kind of makes it sound like it's actually mixed martial arts, and that she's just doing Muay Thai as an aspect of that. It's tough, man. Kickboxing records are a nightmare to fish. But either way, I mean, it does seem to me like Kowalkiewicz is still kind of finding out what she's good at. She's still finding what she's most comfortable with. Unlike Jedrzejczyk, it wasn't like she came into the UFC and it was really safe for her to outfight, and so she fell back on doing that because it was the safest thing for her to do. We didn't really know that she was a pretty dangerous clinch and ground fighter until her UFC career. We started to see flashes of that, and then it really came to a head in the Namajunas fight. Whereas for Jedrzejczyk, I mean, we all knew Jedrzejczyk was like this leg-kicking, jabbing, clinching fighter from her Muay Thai career, and she wasn't allowed to use those things in her early MMA career. And so she kind of had to get comfortable to the point where she could allow the full breadth of the game she kind of already had to blossom. And in the process, she learned other skills that have made that game more effective, like the punishing anti-wrestling we've talked about so many times on this show. And so for Jedrzejczyk, it's like coming home. Like, I think Jedrzejczyk these days is kind of doing what she's always been comfortable doing as a fighter, throwing lots of volume, using all of her tools, and fighting in every range, and just being mean. And for Kowalkiewicz, I think she is very quickly proving herself to be a natural, but doesn't quite know what she's going to do yet. I do wonder what the game plan could be for Kowalkiewicz against Jedrzejczyk. Some of this is bolstered by the fact that Jedrzejczyk has maybe fought more hittable wrestlers, but I think Jedrzejczyk's the only fighter on the UFC roster to actually have a higher average of significant strikes landed per minute than Kowalkiewicz.
They're both real high up there, and I think that's kind of the problem in this matchup for Kowalkiewicz, is because look at the things that she does well: range striking, kind of in and out range striking, and work in the clinch. And then we've now seen that she's got some takedown ability. Well, she's fighting somebody who has almost impenetrable takedown defense for anybody but the very best wrestlers in the division. She's bigger. She's a little more physically imposing. She's a better clinch fighter than Kowalkiewicz, and she's got a more diverse, much more dangerous arsenal at range where she can match the thing that Kowalkiewicz does best, which is pace. So it's real hard for me looking at this fight on paper to see how Kowalkiewicz makes this worse, especially a Joanna Jedrzejczyk who's being trained by American Top Team and has gotten the sparring with all the great fighters they have there. Some of whom, like Tisha Torres, can really mimic a lot of the things that Kowalkiewicz is going to try and do in this fight.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
So, like, she can go there. She's training with a room full of female fighters who can imitate aspects of what Kowalkiewicz is going to bring to the cage. Like, I just have a real hard time seeing what her path to victory is. She's going to try and win rounds against one of the soundest round winners in all of MMA. Maybe she gets one early, I guess, but I don't know. I just don't see it. It's real hard for me to see.
Yeah, well, the things that, Namajunas kind of had a bit of a breakdown in their fight. She kind of started to lose her will as that fight went on. I think that was pretty evident. And The other two fighters that Kowalkiewicz has fought in the UFC just couldn't match her pace. If you look at the fight metric numbers, she basically doubled their strikes in both of those fights. And like I said, Jedrzejczyk's the only fighter in the roster who consistently lands more strikes than Kowalkiewicz. If you look at Jedrzejczyk's fight metric page, the numbers are pretty insane, especially for her most recent fights. It's 126 landed against Jessica Penne, 220 landed against Letourneau, 176 landed most recently against Claudia Gadelha. And better striking defense, too. That's the other number that stands out, and I think that's obvious from watching them fight. Jedrzejczyk has been in some tough fights lately, the Letourneau fight and the Gadelha fight. This one may be the same. Kowalkiewicz is so tough and gritty, and she will be throwing volume round after round. But Jedrzejczyk is a lot harder to hit than Kowalkiewicz. The fact that she gets her feet out of position is not just a problem for her striking power, but for her ability to avoid damage as well. You see a lot of Kowalkiewicz coming in to throw, and seeing a counter coming, and she just kind of has to flail her arms at it to hope that she blocks the punch and lean straight back with her feet square. And a lot of times she gets hit. And fortunately for Kowalkiewicz, most of her opponents don't hit very hard. And so she hasn't really paid the price for that. And while Jedrzejczyk is not a massive power puncher, she's certainly a very crisp puncher. And I can really, really see Kowalkiewicz walking into like a hard right hand and us getting to actually find out what her chin is really like, because the positioning for durability and defensiveness is not really there. She's an upright, open sort of fighter when she attacks in particular.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that. I'm watching her in the background here, her fight with Rose Namajunas, and she did a lot of kind of backing away with her hands down, and Namajunas made her pay for it a couple of times. Like, Namajunas landed some good shots. So I think, and Namajunas is a hard puncher. I think we know that Kowalkiewicz can take a shot, but taking shot after shot after shot from somebody who's not going to break and who's going to put that kind of pace on you over and over and over again for all 25 minutes is kind of another story. I think it goes to the cards. Like, I think it'll be a really fun, quick-paced kind of fight. But I could definitely see Jedrzejczyk just kind of swarming her at some point and doing got her backed up to the fence, throw a 40 punch flurry and get the ref to stop it kind of thing.
Yeah, I think most likely we'll see a decision, but the ability to hurt the opponent or to land those telling shots is really a really good ability for winning rounds. And what has in part made Kowalkiewicz such a good round winner is that she can no-sell the shots that her opponents are landing, in part because they're not very good punchers. I think she's weirdly difficult to hit, kind of in a, I don't know, who's a weirdly defensively effective, like in a Phil Davis way. You know what I mean? Like, Phil Davis, not actually that easy to outstrike by a huge margin, pretty hard to hit, but it doesn't look good even when he's barely being outstruck. And for Kowalkiewicz, I just see you don't want to have your feet square and your head straight up and really let all the judges in the audience see how much your head snaps back or how much you have to sit back on your heels when you get hit by a shot. You want to be in such a position. Yeah.
She's one of those fighters defensively. Like, she's not good defensively. It's just that she's very rarely in a space where she can be hit cleanly, easily. You know, like Stephen Thompson is like that. Like, when you can track down Stephen Thompson, he's not that hard to hit. But it's very hard to get him in a space where you can cleanly land where you can cleanly land power punches on him.
Yeah, great comparison.
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that lately. So if Jedrzejczyk, I think we'll see Jedrzejczyk pressure. God damn it, Lucy. I think we'll see Jedrzejczyk pressure her, and I think that if Kowalkiewicz gets backed up to the fence, she's in big trouble.
Yeah, it seems like you see Kowalkiewicz, you think if you put her in one of those like sparring drills where she had to have her front foot in the middle of a tire, and so did her sparring partner, she would get messed up. Whereas Jedrzejczyk would be a lot more comfortable.
Like it's a drill that we used to do all the time where we'd have to back up to the wall, plant our back foot against the wall, and then do nothing but move our head and parry and block and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and Kowalkiewicz doesn't really have those skills. It's a lot of everything is really built around the ability to move away, and it is just tough. It is not hard to see her giving Jedrzejczyk a good fight, but it is difficult to see her winning because I think to beat Jedrzejczyk in a volume kickboxing match, she would have to knock her out. And I just don't see that happening. So
yeah, I think this is going to look a lot like the Letourneau fight.
Yeah, which is not a bad thing. That was a great fight. And it'll probably even a little more faster paced than that because I think Kowalkiewicz throws a lot more volume than Letourneau.
Yeah. So kind of just one last thing before we wrap up this segment. Now that Jedrzejczyk is at American Top Team, how do you expect to see her game change?
I don't know. Actually, I did want to talk about that as well. I kind of assumed when I first heard that she'd moved to ATT that she would have sort of combined camps the way Kyoji Horiguchi did, like would have brought some of her trainers with her. But I looked at a lot of Instagram photos. Doesn't seem like any of her old trainers came with her. She's working with new boxing coaches and so on and so forth. And so I wonder if it'll be good for her, if maybe she reached her peak at her old team when she did seem to be making, especially as far as like female fighters go, where often the level of training that they can find is not that great because they don't tend to make as much money as the male fighters because it hasn't quite grown to that level yet. You expect a lot of sort of lackluster technique and everything. And so Jedrzejczyk was like a great example of someone training exactly as they should, picking up all of these excellent skills, the ability to defend takedowns, the strategic thinking in how to make those defenses count, letting her game blossom. She seemed to be doing a really good job at her old team. And I wonder what the reasoning was for her leaving and going to ATT. I mean, I think obviously having a ton of great sparring partners and having this huge facility and also probably living in Florida rather than in Poland was part of the appeal. But I do wonder what, like, technically maybe she aspires to do here that she didn't do there. What do you think, Pat?
I'm curious about that. I really am. I think maybe she just needed something different, was looking for something different because it wasn't like she picked American Top Team out of a hat. Like she went to a bunch of different places and tried out a bunch of different coaches.
Yeah, she went to Elevation, didn't she? She was doing like a tour.
Yeah, I think she stopped by King's for a couple of days too. I know she was in Albuquerque. I know she tried that out. I think that like in a broad sense, this is stepping outside the in the cage stuff. She needs to be in the United States. She can't be in Poland for 12 or 16 weeks at a time, and expect that to work in kind of the broad context of making her a star. It's real hard to make somebody a star from Poland. You know, you need to be able to do the media appearances in the United States. You need to be able to do the show bookings like that. I think that's probably the biggest thing. As to why she moved. But the flip side to it is like I still think as good as she is right now, she still has room to get better. I think she can refocus her striking, and I think that there will probably come a time where she becomes a little she needs to tone down the volume a little bit. And I think that that at her current camp she wasn't going to get more defensively sound. Like, yeah. I don't think that they were going to work a lot on her head movement and things like that. And based on the videos that I've seen of her training at ATT, there's a lot of emphasis on her head movement and defense in the pocket and things like that.
And she gets to sit next to Robbie Lawler some more. I know I've always enjoyed seeing those two together. They seem to always, for some reason, be placed together at UFC events. So maybe because who wouldn't want to sit next to Bob Lawler?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think the sparring is also a big piece of it. I think, honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if she got tired of sparring with men. I think that that's a big thing for a lot of female fighters, and it's why ATT has so many good female fighters there, because they want to go and spar with similarly skilled and talented women.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and the defensive point is awesome. There is nothing I'd like to see more than a more defensively sound Joanna Jedrzejczyk. I already said she's better at that than Kowalkiewicz, but if she comes into this fight slipping shots and countering and really being difficult to hit to a degree of avoiding around 70% or more of strikes, then I will be very, very happy. That'd be great. So both going with Jedrzejczyk, and I think that's time for a break. So when we come back, Pat, why don't we jump in with another fight from UFC 205, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Michael Johnson after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands, and we are about to talk about Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Michael Johnson. We're about to talk about it. It's kind of like the heavy bag sound effect. I have to not we are going to talk about, but fair warning, this topic is about to be presented. There's a part of me, Pat, that just hates when people are startled. You know, so
you want to avoid it. You're sensitive to those in our audience who might have a heart problem or something like that. You know, a sensitive disposition in general.
Yes, if you have a pacemaker, be warned. We are about to talk about Nurmagomedov versus Johnson. Interesting fight, Pat. Very interesting. You were just saying to me before we began that you think there is a strong chance that Michael Johnson could pull off the upset. And
if you were going to build a fighter, I think at 155 pounds, kind of on just purely skill wise, to beat Khabib Nurmagomedov, it would probably look a lot like Michael Johnson. It'd be either Michael Johnson or Edson Barboza.
Like, technically speaking, what tools he has in his arsenal, it would be Michael Johnson or something like it.
Yeah, it would be either Johnson or Barboza, one of those two guys. A stick and move outfighter with really good footwork, who's got quick hands, hits pretty hard, has a good kicking game, and has really, really, really good takedown defense. Yeah. Right, like the fact that he's a southpaw too. It accentuates that range aspect. If your whole goal is to keep your opponent away from you, is to utilize space as much as possible, the extra couple of inches being a southpaw gives you is key. That's a big deal in this kind of fight. So if on paper, if that's what we're looking at, also a high volume striker, somebody who can work at pace, who can still win rounds even if he does get taken down and lose a chunk of time on the mat, like he still throws enough that he can make up that disparity. Like on that basis, there's a lot of reasons to look at this fight and say, okay, I can see how Michael Johnson wins. I see an easy path to victory for him, or not easy, but a clear path to victory.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely spot on, and the ability that Johnson has to win might in fact be enhanced by Khabib Nurmagomedov's weaknesses, some of which we may not know about. You know, has he fully recovered from his long layoff and the injuries? Don't know. It kind of looked like he went through a process of recovery over the course of the Darrell Horcher fight. He certainly didn't really look like his old self at the beginning of that fight. And whether he did by the end or not, I'm not sure, because he was fighting a short notice opponent. It was a kind of fight where you kind of felt grateful he wasn't fighting Tony Ferguson. You know what I mean? Seeing that performance, you're kind of relieved for his sake.
Yeah, exactly. Like there were things in that fight that did not make you feel real great about how he would have looked coming in there off of a 2-year layoff against a guy with a ton of experience like Ferguson, who's just on the
contender.
ball.
Yeah, who's on a roll too. So, and then stylistically, how does Khabib deal with an outfighter? We don't really know, because pretty much everyone he's fought in the UFC has been kind of the opposite of that style. We have like Gleison Tebow, guys like that, him and Pat Healy, like these kind of slow, come forward bruisers with submission wrestling games. We have Abel Trujillo and Thiago Tavares, like two just kind of spotty fighters in general with their very serious problems. And if I do recall correctly, Tavares did have some success outfighting against Nurmagomedov before getting clipped. And then we have RDA, who you were saying before, Pat, we don't really know how comfortable he is when he can't pressure his opponent. He doesn't always pressure, but he likes to have the option. You know, it seems like that kind of fighter, and he doesn't like to be pressured. And so Nurmagomedov can certainly and often chooses to fight as a pressure fighter, forcing his opponent to react so he can better set up his strikes and takedowns off of each other and holding onto that initiative. And that really seemed to be the problem with RDA, that anytime he got a moment to attack Nurmagomedov, he felt like he really had to make the most of it and went nuts, kind of charging after him and got taken down again. How does Nurmagomedov deal with someone who doesn't have that reaction when they're being pressured?
Yeah, that's exactly the question here. That's the really big one. And can Khabib at least do enough at range to score some points, to not get blown out in that phase if he can't immediately get takedowns?
Yeah.
Like, and what is that? And kind of too, we have to question, what does that do to him mentally if he's in a fight where he's really, really, really got to work hard, not just to get his takedowns, but to set them up in the first place. Like, because you can't bull rush Michael Johnson and expect to get takedowns. His footwork's too good. If he sees a shot coming, he's got a fantastic sprawl. He's really good at using that combination of spacing and technical takedown defense to keep his opponents from getting into the mat.
He's very rarely there to be taken down.
Yeah, he's got really strong hips. He's very quick, very athletic. Like, these are all things that if you're looking at this matchup on paper, you think there are good reasons to pick, not just to like bet on Michael Johnson as an underdog, but to pick him outright.
Yeah. And yeah, it's so I'll say what and I know you agree with me, Pat, but I'll say what my main concern is with favoring Michael Johnson to win, and I think it just might be a bit of emotion or mental discipline that he seems to lack. It's maybe going a bit too far to draw some kind of line between the fact that he like went nuts screaming at Dustin Poirier before catching himself and apologizing, or that he has had, I think, criminal issues in his private life. Maybe the guy has a bit of a temper, and maybe the Black Zillions team is a team that kind of encourages that. They certainly have a lot of guys with like domestic abuse records and assault records and various other things like that. But also just given the kinds of performances we've seen from Johnson in fights, how poorly he dealt with Nate Diaz getting in his face. And he's not the only guy to have gone through that process, but he really didn't deal well with Nate Diaz sort of messing with him in the middle of the fight. And so you kind of have questions about how well he can stick to a game plan against someone who is absolutely unwavering in the pursuit of theirs. And I think in this contest, you have to say that Nurmagomedov is the more poised fighter. If nothing else, the Horcher fight definitely proved that.
Yeah, that is exactly it. That is exactly the dynamic that you would need to be worried about if you're trying to make a case for Michael Johnson, is what happens when things go wrong, because they will. Like, when you're fighting Khabib Nurmagomedov, you can't fight him for 15 minutes and not get taken down. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just like, no matter how much Khabib has to sell out to get the takedown, or like no matter how much he's gotten hit before then, it is a safe bet that at some point his hands will wind up around Michael Johnson's in a body lock, or he'll have him or he'll be able to get in on a takedown chain.
He finishes an average of 6.7 takedowns per 15-minute fight.
Yeah, it is a given that is going to happen.
You're going to get taken down here.
Yeah, and so the question is, how do you react when that happens? What happened in the Diaz fight, I think, is instructive here, even though it was in the striking phase and not in the wrestling phase, because Johnson went out and he had a lot of success in the first round, landing low kicks, landing body kicks, maintaining his preferred distance against a taller boxer, and in controlling the pace too. He didn't let himself start going wild and commit to fighting at the pace that Diaz wanted to set. He wanted to work fast, but he wanted to work just a bit slower, and he did a good job of maintaining that. But when Diaz started landing strikes, suddenly Johnson forgot about the kicks. He consented to fight a long distance punching match with a guy who was longer than him and who could work at a quicker pace. Like, he consented to fight Nate Diaz's fight. And so that's the question here, is like, what happens to him mentally when he winds up on the mat? What happens to him mentally when he defends 3 out of 4 takedowns in a chain and still finds himself on the ground?
Right.
Like, so I think there are good reasons from that perspective to think that Nurmagomedov is the kind of guy. He's fought through some adversity before. Like, he's had tough fights. He knows what he has to do to keep going. He knows what his path to victory is. And it's a safe bet that he's going to stick with it. Yeah,
that is the Diaz-Johnson fight, by the way, is one of many fights that has become more lopsided with time. Watching it live, I wasn't certain the decision would go to Diaz. Having rewatched it, it's not super close, but it's definitely a fight where it looks like if Michael Johnson had just stuck to his kicking game, he probably would have won. If he had stuck to the element of his strategy that was really working well in the first round, I'm not sure if Nate Diaz could have made up that deficit just by surging and making him feel bad in the third round. It's the fact that he wasn't disciplined. And And Nurmagomedov is not going to be the same kind of frustration that Nate Diaz is. Very few fighters are. But his style is just so... He's so damn determined to take you down. I mean, I've never seen Rafael dos Anjos as frustrated by anyone as I have by Nurmagomedov. I've never seen Abel Trujillo as frustrated as I have against anyone but Nurmagomedov. It's not that he's taunting you and messing with you. It's that you just... If a guy's hitting you, you can always try to hit him back. With Nurmagomedov, as a striker especially, you don't get to even try to do what you really want to do. Like, when he's actually on takedowns and chain wrestling, you don't get the luxury of trying to fight back. You're just defending the whole time. And that can be extremely frustrating, especially because a lot of times you're not even being hurt. You're just watching the fight slip away as he just kind of spins around on top of you and crushes you with his weight.
Yeah, let me give you a hypothetical here, right? Like, I think this is an entirely plausible scenario that plays out in this fight. Johnson comes out, wins kind of a nip and tuck first round. Nurmagomedov does reasonably well on the feet, but it's still one of those rounds where, like, Johnson lands, say, 25 strikes and Nurmagomedov lands 17, right? And he fails on three different takedown attempts. Mostly Johnson kind of controls the space. Mm-hmm. Okay, we go out there into the second round. Johnson does the same thing in the first minute, but then Nurmagomedov gets in on a chain and takes him down. And he manages to control him for the entire round, takedown after takedown after takedown after takedown, controls him on the ground. So now we go into the third round. It's 1 round apiece. Whose mindset, who comes out in the third round and you think their head's in the right place?
Yeah, definitely Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, it's still a totally winnable fight for Johnson. It's still 1 round apiece. It wasn't a 10-8. Let's assume it wasn't a 10-8 in the second. Like, he had some success in the first minute of that round, but then he got grounded on for 4 minutes.
That's kind of the pattern of Nurmagomedov's career, too. He's kind of an inexorable fighter. He's a good momentum fighter. He really builds as the fight goes on, and it becomes harder and harder to take his takedown entries and his chains and his scrambling away from him. You know, the more initiative he has in his favor, the more momentum on his side, the easier he finds it to just be creative and figure out any of dozens of ways to bring you back down to the ground. And he
knows that if he can do that once, that you're going to be absolutely terrified of at the prospect of it happening again, because you're talking about, like, it's hard to overstate how strong Nurmagomedov is when he gets his hands on you. Like, not to fanboy out or anything, but, like, there's video of him taking down 235-pound Daniel Cormier, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and he's got the reputation now as well. It's like the puncher. Half of the puncher's ability is really the threat of his punches. Is that the guys really don't want to get hit by them. That's sometimes even more effective than the punches that actually land, is the fact that the person is kind of terrified of it happening. How do you go into a fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov and not worry on some level about the takedown? And so once he gets one takedown, a lot of fighters are going to feel like it's over, you know, and that they are just trying to struggle to the surface for the rest of the fight. They're not going to feel like it might be a takedown from another fighter. They say, well, you know, I lost that round. I'll just stop it next round. With Nurmagomedov, there is this threat that once he starts taking you down, you can't win. So I don't think Michael Johnson's going to deal particularly well with that. I would like to see it. I quite like Michael Johnson as a fighter. I think he's got a great style. I think despite some temper issues and everything, he seems like in some ways a pretty good guy. He's definitely an admirable fighter. He's a hard worker. He's usually pretty respectful to his opponents, and certainly I liked the fact that he apologized to Dustin Poirier. There's some things in his record that makes it difficult to root for him, but I like watching Michael Johnson fight, and so I'd like to see it. But that is the main reason. The style matchup aside, the real reason I feel like I can't pick him is that I don't think he'll deal really well with fighting a Khabib Nurmagomedov fight.
Yeah, I'm with that. I mean, like, the scenario I laid out is, I think, the most plausible one in the fight. Is the most plausible one. That, like, Johnson has some success, he wins a round, then at some point he gets taken down, and at that point the whole thing kind of crumbles. Like, that's once you feel what Khabib has to offer in that phase, and you can see it too. Like, have you ever seen the video of him like clinch wrestling with Luke Rockhold?
I don't think I have seen that.
So Luke Rockhold is a 220-pound man who has 5 inches of height on Khabib, and Khabib is just effortlessly pinning him against the wall.
Yeah.
Absolutely effortless. And so if your whole game plan, and I mean, so this isn't just about this isn't a conversation necessarily about Michael Johnson mental weakness. It's also a conversation about Khabib and what he brings to the table. And so, but the combination of those two things would seem to play out in a fashion that you end up with a kind of a competitive 29-28 decision for Khabib.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds about right to me. So why don't we?
Though the fact that Johnson is plus 240 right now on the betting line seems kind of crazy to me.
It does. Let me just go ahead and place a bet before the episode goes out. Yeah, it does. I do think there's a strong chance stylistically. And if Michael Johnson comes in and again, like the other factor, if Khabib is not up to form, then Johnson's chances only increase. The style matchup only becomes easier for him to navigate. So I think Johnson definitely deserves to be a slighter underdog than that. But it is just very difficult to pick against. Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of those fighters who it's really hard to pick against until you see someone beat him. Because at the moment, you kind of feel like a lot of his opponents probably do. Like, what do I do when this guy just keeps coming and keeps trying what he is expertly good at over and over again? And that's the Khabib problem. So let's take one more break, Pat. When we come back, we're going to talk about 2 more fights, both from UFC Fight Night, whatever, tough, Latin America, something, finale. We're going to talk about the women's strawweight matchup on that card. Alexa Grasso makes her UFC debut, and we have been waiting for that for a long time. We've mentioned her on the show several times in the past. And then Rafael dos Anjos versus Tony Ferguson. How can we not talk about that fantastic number 1 contenders fight in the lightweight division just after we talked about another fantastic, potentially number 1 contenders fight? So all of that after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back. First up, Pat, let's go ahead and talk about Alexa Grasso. We have been waiting for Alexa Grasso to come to the UFC for some time now. It feels like ages, which is crazy when you consider that she's only been fighting since 2012, and she's only 23 years old. And so that says 2 things to you if you don't really know who Alexa Grasso is. It says, 1, she's so good at such a young age that we see a lot of potential in her. 2, she's not been fighting that long, and yet having seen just a few of her fights realistically makes us really want to see her in the cage. So both of those speak to the quality of her skill set. And she's fighting Heather Jo Clark. I'll just go ahead and say it because I don't think the matchup is really the fascinating thing here. There's no reason to pick Heather Jo Clark in this fight that I can see. The really big exciting thing is just seeing Alexa Grasso on the biggest stage in the world.
Yeah, I'm with that. Like, Clark has kind of, unfortunately, ended up in this position where she's the journeywoman who welcomes big-time young fighters to the UFC.
She's a gamer who doesn't really have any way to beat this kind of fighter.
Yeah, she's very physically talented, but once you get her speed and her power and her timing and all of that, like, she doesn't have a lot to offer fighters who have this kind of deep technical game. And that's what Alexa Grasso is. Like, you're going to hear a lot of talk about her as a potential star. Right, you're going to hear a lot about the fact that she's from Mexico. She's from a part of Mexico where the UFC doesn't have a lot of fighters from. She's from Guadalajara. She's attractive. She's well spoken. She speaks both English and Spanish. You're going to hear a lot about that kind of stuff from her if you're paying attention in MMA fan circles. What you need to pay attention to is the fact that she is a legitimately outstanding young prospect.
Yeah.
She has a really crisp boxing game. Like, her entire family is boxers, is my understanding. Like, I think her dad was a boxer. I think her brother or brothers are boxers. And you can see that she's the kind of person who spent a lot of time as a child hitting pads.
Well, are we finally in the age, Pat, where people from striking backgrounds are getting into MMA? Like, it's not just people learning striking for MMA, but boxers and kickboxers in MMA. And it seems mostly to be in the women's strawweight division.
Yeah, strangely, I did not think that was the division where we were going to see that happen, but it seems to be the case.
Yeah. It's not surprising that she has a boxing family. Not at all. Looking at her fight, quite possibly at least poised to have the best jab in this division next to Jedrzejczyk. Uses it really, really well. And I think I'm going to say the word poised again in a different sense, and I feel like I've been using it a lot. But I think the most striking thing about Grasso, even more than her technique, which is very clean and impressive, is her poise. She does not look like a 23-year-old with only 4 years of experience, less than 4 years of experience when she fights. That's not what she looks like. She's extremely comfortable just sort of picking opponents apart. Like, she has a sort of clinical attitude to outstriking these people, and she's fighting people who are good strikers by this division standards. Mizuki Inoue and Jodie Esquibel, she dominated both of them. Particularly the Esquibel fight. Like, Jodie Esquibel's a solid fighter. She's not flawless by any means, but she's always game, and she really had no moments in that fight with Grasso. She was completely lost.
I've seen I've watched Jodie Esquibel in her training sessions with Brandon Gibson. I've seen her work around the cage. I know what her approach is. She's super sharp, very smart. She's not the kind of fighter who gives fights away. You have to go out there and beat Jodie Esquibel. She's not going to beat herself. And Alexa Grasso beat the shit out of her.
Yeah,
absolutely beat the shit out of her. And that's when you talk about Grasso as poised, she's got this look on her face when she fights that her heart rate is barely up.
That's what I mean. Yeah, you throw punches at her, she really looks like she has absolutely no fear, and that speaks to good training. And it's not an easy thing to achieve. There are a lot of fighters who are inexperienced who are still going to have that problem. Maybe she just hasn't been pressed enough in some of her fights. But again, she's fought some really talented women, several of whom have been solid strikers, and she has not once looked out of her depth. And then the best thing, of course, is that the most encouraging thing is that she had an injury that kept her out for about over a year after the Inoue fight, came back against Jodie Esquibel, again, one of the better opponents she's fought, and still had absolutely no difficulty. Now, I do wonder, Pat. Oh, were you saying something?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I think I just heard some kickback from my mic for some reason. I do wonder if that poise can be a bit of an issue for Grasso, because she hasn't run into this problem yet, mostly because she's fought some fairly reckless fighters, for some of whom recklessness is actually sort of a boon in a lot of their fights. But I wonder if maybe she's not a fighter with a ton of urgency. Sometimes, especially for ringcraft, she seems really comfortable allowing herself to get backed into the fence. And while on the one hand, it's really great to be comfortable in that situation and not to let it put you off your game, on the other hand, it's kind of like being really comfortable off your back. Like, even if you're comfortable there, you have to know on a metagame
you don't want to be there.
That you don't want to be there. You have to comfortably get back to your feet.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the fence thing, because that's exactly my big critique of her. That she has much better ringcraft than somebody like Anthony Pettis does, but when she does get backed up, she does the thing that Anthony Pettis does, where she plants her feet and throws back, right? And her footwork is much better, her understanding of space is much better, but when you get her there, she still has that instinct to brawl to get you off of her.
Yeah.
And I think that is the kind of thing that we'll probably need to get trained out of her at some point. And I get what you're saying about poise, but I still think that all things considered, it's a massive asset for her, because she's not the kind of MMA striker who panics when they get taken down, right?
Not at all.
Or who, she's very comfortable. She will fight off her back, but she has that kind of 60-second clock in her head where she's like, okay, I tried a couple of triangles, now it's time to get back up.
She's got Tomas Almeida takedown defense. It may not be perfect, but she knows exactly what to do. She's already knows what to do before her butt hits the ground.
Exactly. She comes from the school of takedown defense where you don't stop your momentum.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just about stuffing the initial shot. It's okay, I get taken down, immediate head pressure, hip out, try to get back up.
A lot of just sort of bouncing off the ground when she gets taken down.
Yeah, exactly. So she does have a real sense of urgency there. I get the ringcraft thing, I have a feeling she'll get better at that. That's a thing where we see
Again, yeah,
inexperienced
4
fighters tend
years,
to,
23 years old. She has a lot of time.
like, interesting kind of sidebar on that front. It's the kind of thing where you see an inexperienced fighter make a big improvement when they know they're fighting a pressure fighter. When they know they have to spend if they have good coaches, they spend an entire camp working on keeping their back off the fence, and then that just becomes a thing in their game.
Yeah, maybe. Like maybe again, maybe it's just because it literally has never been a problem for her. So she just hasn't had to specifically train it. It doesn't seem like an urgent issue. So maybe that's it. Maybe what she has a camp where she has to train for that, then it'll suddenly become, because she seems, certainly as a striker and as a mixed martial artist in general, she seems like one of those prospects who's really just capable of sort of picking anything up really easily. Especially given the amount of experience she has, the age she is, looking at the way she uses her jab, the way she moves her feet, the way that she counters and mixes up her strikes, both in the clinch and at range, there don't really seem to be a lot of hard limits on the different kinds of tactics, especially the different kinds of striking tactics that Grasso can pick up in time. So yeah. I'd be surprised if there's something in her game that really makes her incapable of getting her back off the fence. And then again, I don't think there's anything in Anthony Pettis' game that makes him, or in Anthony Pettis' mindset that makes him incapable. I just think it hasn't been addressed.
Yeah, I'm with that. Like, just for our listeners, if you have not watched Grasso's fight with Jodie Esquibel and you have Fight Pass, go watch it, because the look on Grasso's face at the end of the third round, as she has turned Esquibel's entire face into something out of a horror show. I mean, looks like a fractured orbital, definitely busted up. It definitely broke her nose, a couple of cuts. Like, Grasso is coated in Esquibel's blood and does not look like her heart rate has gotten above 75 beats a minute the whole time.
Yeah. She's impressive. It's really good to see her in the UFC. I think Heather Jo Clark is actually, I feel bad for Clark a little bit, but I think she's a perfect fight for Grasso. She's a gamer. She's tough. She's going to give her a chance to put in some good work, but she's not going to beat her. It's a good introduction to the UFC. Yeah. So
yeah, Clark is going to test her in a couple of different ways. She's going to test her against a big, strong, physical athlete, and she's going to test her in every phase. She's going to test her on the feet, and she's going to test her wrestling. So you get to see, like, is there an obvious deficiency here that needs to be addressed? Like, Clark will show you that if it is in fact there.
Yeah, absolutely. So really good fight. Finally, Pat, why don't we wrap up by talking about the main event of the Tough Latin America 3 finale, Rafael dos Anjos versus Tony Ferguson. What a goddamn fight. It's such a great fight between two action fighters. I actually looked this up in the process of doing my Sherdog preview. Tony Ferguson has the highest finishing rate of the entire lightweight top 10 at 72%. And it's actually the best by a significant margin. I think coming in around second are guys like Michael Chiesa and Dustin Poirier, and they're not really that close. They're in the 60s. So you have a super dangerous guy like Tony Ferguson who especially lately, his fighting style has evolved into just completely maniacal, everything all the time. It's manic madness. And his flow between phases and ranges and really just his ability to be creative is kind of unparalleled in this division. And then we have RDA, a guy who I think both you and I thought was pretty well positioned to kind of dominate the lightweight division for some time, and whom I wouldn't necessarily not favor in a rematch with Eddie Alvarez. I still think that's definitely a fight he could have won. He seemed to be doing very well until he got clipped with that hard shot. So we basically have a deposed former champion who is very likely to get his belt back at some point, more likely than almost anybody else in the division. And then the guy who has been sort of banging on the gates for the last year, just taking out top contender after top contender in extremely exciting fashion. What do you make of this matchup?
Oh, this is a fight. This is a proper, real fight here. I love Tony Ferguson's game. I love watching him fight. He is one of my absolute favorite fighters to watch in all of MMA because, like you point out, he is a madman. Yeah. Everything that he does is focused around aggression and forward pressure. And that, I'm glad you raised the point about transitioning from range to range. Ferguson is one of the few fighters in all of MMA who can finish you at any range. He can finish you at long distance. He can finish you in the pocket. He can finish you in the clinch. He can finish you from top position. He can finish you from his back. He can finish you in transitions. He can finish you in extended sequences. He can finish you absolutely anywhere. He is, I think, probably, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say like he's one of the most dangerous all around fighters in the entire sport.
He's
Like,
yeah, absolutely. He's kind of Charles Oliveira without like confidence issues.
confidence issues and durability issues.
Durability, right. He's kind of Charles Oliveira, except that he's very difficult to hurt, and he doesn't lose heart when you hurt him. And so that's really the only problems. Like, those are the biggest problems with Charles Oliveira, and you take those away, you just have this insane offensive dynamo who feels like he can just kind of do anything. The thing is, Pat, is that the problem that we have often identified with fighters who are really good in their transitions, really good at taking the fight anywhere, and I'm not so sure that Ferguson really is great at taking the fight anywhere so much as he's great at the fight being taken anywhere. Like, he can react no matter what's going on. He has an answer in every phase, and I'm not sure if there's maybe a lot of strategy going behind what he always does. It's just kind of put the pressure on and see what happens and just flow with the fight. That seems like the way he approaches things. But the problem we've often identified with fighters like that who are really good in those transitions is that they tend to look decidedly less impressive when stuck in one phase. And I think that was the case in the fight with Edson Barboza, in which he was definitely landing some shots and looked like a maniac, but in which Edson Barboza, I think, was pretty clearly outstriking him before the second round, and definitely against Lando Venata, and definitely back in 2014 against Danny Castillo, when he was put in his back and didn't have the opportunity to funk his way out of it, and looked really underwhelming in a really dull fight. So I have to wonder if Ferguson has maybe been given good matchups, or fighters haven't quite realized that if I can just find a way to consistently stick this guy in one range or in one phase, the game is going to start falling apart. The creativity is not going to be there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think the problem is with the Barboza fight, there is no better pure range striker at 155 pounds, I don't think, than Edson Barboza. If you are stuck at range with Edson Barboza, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something that you don't have a deep or effective range striking game. It's that Edson Barboza is better than practically everybody there. Like, does that make sense? Like, as a kind of a distinction.
There are other things going on in the fight. Like, he did get staggered by an illegal kick in that fight, if I recall, which maybe has some kind of effect. But the real thing is for Tony Ferguson is that the ace up his sleeve is that even when an opponent can do that, they still can't match his pace.
Yeah. So, because I want to come back to this, because Tony Ferguson is actually a very, very good range striker. So if he gets stuck at long distance with practically everybody that he fights, that's still going to favor Ferguson most of the time. Like, he has a very good crisp boxer. He throws hard kicks. He's too hittable. And he doesn't bring his head off the center line very well, especially when he kicks. I think he's super counterable at that. But as you mentioned, the pace. Like, so you can hit him, 8 times a minute, but he's going to hit you 12 times a minute. Like, it's just the pace that he pushes is absolutely insane, even against other fighters who are comfortable pushing a really quick pace, like guys like Lando Venata, who wants to work real fast, guys like Edson Barboza, who wants to work pretty danged fast. So I don't know what kind of Dos Anjos we're going to get here. Like, that's kind of my question, is what does he look like after his first loss in a long time? He's not working with Rafael Cordero for this fight. What does his headspace look like, and what is his game plan going to be?
He's not working with Rafael Cordero.
Not for this fight, huh?
Interesting. Who's he working with instead?
A crew of guys. Felipe Della Monica is his BJJ coach. He's got a bunch of people. He did a lot of work with Benny Dariush. He's still in Southern California, but then they went to altitude. I know Cordero. I'm pretty sure Cordero is cornering Dariush, but I don't think he's cornering. But he's not cornering RDA.
Has there been some kind of falling out there that you know of, or is it just kind of a change of direction for RDA?
I honestly don't know. I don't have any inside info on this.
Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine Rafa dos Anjos having any kind of emotion, like being upset at Cordero. Unless, like, I don't know, Cordero, like, said something about RDA's family. He's a man with simple values, Like, so maybe Cordero said something about his wife, and then RDA just, like, decided to just leave and be silent, an ogre somewhere else. Well, the thing is, yes, he's Tony Ferguson's good there. He's got the pace to back him up. My question is if he cannot get that finish, if it does go to the third round, can he keep up that pace for multiple rounds? Because really, Tony Ferguson, the complete madman, has not really appeared until pretty recently. Before then, he was a wild, creative fighter who was still kind of, fairly reserved when he needed to be. And I don't know if maybe he just felt like going nuts was the best tactic for him, or if he's gone full Dong Hyun Kim and just decided that brawling is the best way to go. But the Venata fight, the Barboza fight, those are his craziest performances, where he has just come out from the opening bell, both rounds, pushed the pace, walked through shots, and just nonstop kept coming. And like Nurmagomedov, it works well because it puts the initiative strongly in his favor. Even if his opponent is hitting him, they're doing it in reaction to what Ferguson is doing. So he's always, in a way, in control of their actions. He's always in control of what is happening in the fight, and if he gets hit, he can understand why and then change things up to account for that. He has the initiative. But against guys like Josh Thompson or against guys like Gleison Tibau or Abel Trujillo, he didn't fight that way. And those are fights that went longer, I guess except the Tibau fight. But that one was very much an outfighter's performance, sort of walking Tibau into shots. And I don't know if I really doubt that he can fight the way he has in his last two fights for more than 2.5 rounds. I really strongly doubt it. And I wonder if without that, against a guy who is also renowned for having good stamina, a guy who apparently is also working at altitude for this camp in RDA, how he will adapt if he can't use pace to break his opponent. I think it's always a risky proposition to go into a fight with RDA and say, I'm going to tire him out by working at a pace faster than that which he can maintain, because the guy is extremely fit.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks here, because I think Madman Tony Ferguson might actually be a better approach to beating RDA, in the sense that the RDA's game is very heavily dependent upon him having the initiative, or at least the game that we've seen from him in the last few years. It's very dependent upon him being the one pressuring, the one moving you back, and more than anything on you backing up to the fence. Open space RDA is a good fighter, but RDA with you, when you have your back to the fence, is an elite murderer, because every piece of his game comes together in that particular scenario. So
elite murderer is the best.
He is an elite murderer. He will kill you, and he's very good at that.
The cream of the murdering crop.
Yeah. So but in every phase, RDA depends on the fence. He depends on it to put his strikes together. He depends on it for his wrestling. He's not a good open space wrestler, I wouldn't say. He's okay, but he's not.
He's a great cage wrestler. He's a great cage wrestler, but his takedowns in open space they usually end up with him driving you back to the cage and then taking you down.
Yeah, and even on the mat, he has a very fence-focused game because he likes to use that to pin your hips in place.
Yeah.
So to me, this is an interesting thing, because if both guys are going to come out aggressive and try to push their opponent back, I think Ferguson has the better tools to play a kind of a stick and move game on the outside. But I don't know that he's disciplined enough to do that. I think RDA has the discipline to do something other than pressure, but I don't think he has the tools to do it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense as a kind of a thing?
And if Ferguson does choose not to pressure, does that only really encourage RDA to pressure him? You know what I mean? I kind of wonder. I can see both guys coming into this fight trying to pressure, because that seems like the best thing to do against both of them in some ways, is to take them off their game. Pressuring is great, again, because it gives you the initiative, make them react to you, and control where they stand in the cage. And so, I don't know, what are some other examples? Can you think of any off the top of your head, other examples of sort of pressure fighter versus pressure fighter fights that we've seen in the past?
I think Rockhold Weidman ended up playing out a lot like that.
Okay, Rockhold Weidman, maybe Nurmagomedov RDA, but that was a very different kind of skill set that those two guys had. These two are more similar, I think, in what really strong phase advantages they have over each other. They're pretty well matched in that regard. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, you have to imagine either it ends up being a fight where both guys sort of consent to stand in open space and neither be pressuring and backing up, but both just kind of box with each other. I'm not certain who wins that, but I think that's a really closely matched kind of fight. And then The other option is that one of them gives and the other gets to pressure them. And I have to assume that with his, I think Ferguson is more willing to kind of let the fight do what it will. And so I kind of think RDA will end up getting to pressure if he wants to, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm also not sure. I do think that RDA, like in an open space striking match, I think he does have the skills to be competitive there. And in fact, even to win that if he really wants. He's certainly a better kicker, I think, than Tony Ferguson. And that's a great tool for him at long range. He has a fantastic kicking game. And I think his footwork is pretty good. I just think he always likes to have the option of pressuring in his back pocket, you know?
I'm less convinced of that. I think that, like, if you look at RDA historically, when he has been stuck in open space as a striker, he can't push the kind of pace that he wants to push. That's the big issue with RDA in open space, is he ends up as a guy who gives his opponent too much room. And because he's not super tall, while he's explosive and pretty fast, he's not like, he has trouble touching his opponent as much as he would like.
That's a good point. Okay, so I'm thinking of impressive performances. We've got the Ben Henderson fight and the Donald Cerrone fight. Those are ones that happened largely in open space. And even the Jason High fight, all of those had some moments where the opponent was kind of having their way with RDA. Just a bit. Not a ton, but just a bit where it was competitive. And where if you compare them to the most recent Cerrone fight or the Pettis fight or the Nate Diaz fight, when that you can really tell the difference between when RDA is having his way with his opponent and when it's not quite that comfortable for him.
Yeah, without any real confidence, that's why I'm taking Ferguson here. I just think that he's got a few more tools. He's got a few more ranges where he's really dangerous. I think if he knows he can't play off his back, he'll be less inclined to get stuck there. Like that's my big concern as somebody who's picking Ferguson, is not the range striking. It's not the pressure. It's RDA manages to take him down, and Ferguson's like, oh, I can play with this dude. I can play with this dude. And he gives away 3 minutes of a round trying to hit a triangle against a guy, I think, with the best all around top game in the division, like the most
very likely
best.
Yes.
I think that would be my big concern.
Who else
gives it away?
Who else has so effortlessly cut through the guard of Donald Cerrone in this division?
Yeah, not many guys.
Pretty much no one. Like nobody's gotten on top of Donald Cerrone and just been like not completely unconcerned with what Cerrone is trying to do with his legs. I'm going to take RDA, and I think we're kind of on the same page, but just kind of siding on different sides of what feels kind of like a 50-50 issue, which is that I think that Ferguson is not a totally consistent fighter in his own ways, as you have acknowledged. And I think the big issue here is his pace. I don't have any confidence that he can keep up that kind of pace. Even if he does, there's a very good chance that if he does, then he finishes RDA early. And so, that I think that really could happen. But banking on a 5-round fight, I don't think Ferguson can keep up that pace. So either what happens is he comes out crazy and then fades, or he opts for a different kind of game plan where he's not pressuring and constantly coming after Dos Anjos. And if he's not doing that, either because he's too tired to or because he plans not to get tired, he opens the window for Dos Anjos to pressure him. And if Dos Anjos can get his pressure game going, I think he can have a field day. I think he can pin Ferguson on his back. I think he can pin him at a certain range against the fence or pin him in place. I think he has a lot of options to keep Ferguson in one place. And if you do that, I think a lot of what makes Tony Ferguson magic kind of disappears. So, but it's a crazy fight, Pat. It's nuts.
Yeah, I'm with that. I'm with all of that. I don't disagree with any of it.
Yeah. So, man, I'm looking forward to it. I almost ended up more excited about this fight than I was about UFC 205. Maybe it's just because it's happening sooner, but this is such a great matchup. UFC 205 is just around the corner. So many good fights to close out 2016, and we are so happy to have people at home joining us to talk about them. Before we close out, Pat, why don't you tell the folks what you've got doing this week?
Not a whole lot. I will have a complete guide for this week's upcoming card. But then everything starts to drop around the end of this week, beginning of next week. I will have an interview with Stephen Thompson, UFC welterweight contender Stephen Thompson. Hopefully I will have an interview with Joanna Jedrzejczyk. I will have breakdowns of all 3 title fights at UFC 205. I will have a Washington Post article probably on McGregor Alvarez. Man, I got some other stuff too. Oh, I'm doing a Q&A with John Anik. That should come out. I've got a lot of stuff going on. So check in next week if you want a more complete list. But practically every angle of UFC 205 I'll be covering.
Yeah, this week I'm going to be covering one of the fights from 205 in a breakdown. I haven't decided which yet, but that's going to be happening. And then I'm also working on a piece for RDA Ferguson. Rather than talking about the main event, which of course is fantastic, and now I'm kind of tempted to do so, I'm going to try and talk about some of the more unheralded fighters on the card and do a bit of a feature where I talk about a few fighters that are not necessarily prospects, but ones that don't get a ton of attention that if you're in this fandom to watch good fights and interesting styles, that you should watch these guys. So I'm going to try and do that, a little bit of a fighter watch. I don't know what you would call it. Something like that. And then Sherdog preview for Tough Latin America 3. And then, like Pat, I got a lot of UFC 205 stuff and Ward Kovalev stuff starting to come out later this week and next week. So lots of stuff on the horizon. And again, thank you all for joining us as we discuss it and get all excited and just all antsy about it, because that's the fun part is letting the build up to the fight happen and getting to talk about it in professional terms as a way of hiding the fact that you're really just kind of just shaking in your chair because you want to see some guys punch each other. So on that note, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. By the way, at Boxing Bush on Twitter and at Patrick_Wyman. This has been Heavy Hands.
Jesus.